Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, if you haven't heard, I'm actually an adjunct professor now. I never thought I'd be called that at my children's school, Stillwater Christian here in Kalispell, Montana. On Mondays, I host my Young Entrepreneurs Syndicate about business leaders and teaching people how to be entrepreneurs. And it's been a great course. We started back in January, but the president of the school found out about it, and he asked me if I would teach a class 3 days a week for an hour. So I am taking a lot of joy and pleasure in speaking to the young minds at the high school. These are high schoolers that are in the class, and it's just been a lot of fun. So I'm going into my second week today, and I look forward to that now. So thank you to Stillwater and the president in thinking about me. And today's guest, the title of her book really resonated with me, which is Pivot to Clarity. And it's written by Michele Leavitt. Is that correct? Leavitt. All right. Got half of it right. So that just really resonates with me, the title. I wanted to learn more about it. I thought no better way than to just have you on the show. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs online, and I am an entrepreneur as well. Didn't know it until I left corporate. And then I went, oh, well, that's why I didn't fit corporate. Sometimes, at least when I was in corporate, high achievers, unless you're in sales, aren't necessarily welcome by peers, those who really want to get it done and do new things and change, which is one of the reasons I helped organizations through pivots, quick change. And it's one of the reasons I realized I am the pivot catalyst, because two things. One is I help organizations and those leaders really move through change. But while they're doing so, and even before they do so, because they know they're going to have to change, really create that foundation so that change is not so hard. And that is where the inspiration from my books come from, including the inspiration for Pivot to Clarity. It was hard to read, hard to write, because it's so important.
Yeah. Well, you said a couple quick things there that I just thought, wow, that's really important to identify. One is oftentimes we're in a corporate world or working for somebody else, not realizing that we're entrepreneurs. And once we understand what that means and really what we want to chase after, life can change dramatically. And you also mentioned sometimes entrepreneurs in the corporate environment doesn't really fit well, especially amongst your peers, right? Don't outperform me. I want to dig into your book, but can you give us some background on you and your early corporate life, or some of the things that you've done in your past life prior to writing this book?
Sure. My background is financial. Luckily, back then, when you graduated in accounting, you were also positioned to be analytical. So meaning it wasn't necessarily that you had to live in the here's A, here's B, here's the rule, and here's what you have to meet. But it's that curiosity role. It's that discovery role. It's that role where you have to get out there and talk to people to find out what's going on. The people closer to the work. It's not an ivory tower role.
Yeah.
Some people might treat it that way, but it's not. And it was a wonderful foundation for me. I am very curious, and it also is just so wonderful to help people have that voice and help it bubble up to those who are making the decisions for the organization, so that they are making better decisions. And that is kept with me throughout my life. I run leadership peer groups, and the two main reasons for those is decision support. I wish I had had that when I started as an entrepreneur. I made so many mistakes, especially about peer level people who I showed respect for and didn't bring up the skepticism and the discernment that I had when I was helping others make decisions. So one of the reasons I formed these, out of our pain, oftentimes we want to give gifts. So formed these peer groups so that it provides decision support for leaders amongst themselves. That's where you really get the good support, where there's no agenda other than your success, and being aware of blind spots. Because in my journey, especially from becoming an entrepreneur when I was 40 and now I'm 61, I encountered some blind spots that didn't show themselves until I went on into the entrepreneurial world and made those mistakes. And when you don't have a safe group around you, they're not going to identify. They might even take advantage. They might see them, right? And they might take advantage of them. So to all you entrepreneurs out there, really make sure that you have a solid group of people around you that are supporting you in your decision making.
That is such great advice and so important, especially as you're writing your business plan, maybe you're raising capital and you're deciding what the formation of your company is going to look like. I as well have made those mistakes. We're emotional about it. It's interesting because when I teach entrepreneurs, I'm so passionate about what I'm saying. And it doesn't come from I want to be right. It comes from I've learned a bad lesson and I don't want you to go through it. I'll give mine briefly because I'm sure you can relate. I raised a bunch of capital to start an import company. And I hired a bunch of my colleagues that were top level salespeople. We're talking 6-figure salaries. And I brought them in thinking they're the best at what they do. They'll be the best for me. But the reality is, none of them were entrepreneurs. They didn't know what it was like to go out and get your hands dirty, to hit the streets to sell something, because what we were previously selling sold itself. It's a worldwide brand. Everybody knew it. You walked in the door, you had a cup of coffee with them, and they said, yeah, just send me whatever you need to sell. But when you become an entrepreneur with something new, you really got to get that grit out. Right. And I don't want to say wasted. It was $1 million lesson for me. I hired the wrong people. I didn't look at what the skill set I needed, which was entrepreneurs, not, these flashy, great salespeople in some other world. So to your point, we can make some mistakes and really be passionate about teaching people otherwise.
Right. And for me, it was especially hard with those who maybe I brought in as a partner or an alliance partner, or a strategic vendor, again, who I saw as a peer, and maybe they had a bunch of investment, or they had been referred to me, so that all of those things that I knew how to have discernment to make decisions fell through because it's hard to say respect is a blind spot, but respect was a blind spot.
Yeah.
And giving trust is not a blind spot. Although absolutely give trust first, but have people you bounce things off of because you know that about yourself. And being a woman for me was hard. I actually had to let a business go because someone I brought into the business as a strategic partner decided I should be part of the deal. What do you do?
Yeah.
And I could not find I spent so much money trying to find a replacement to take over this kind of complicated hardware that did remote monitoring to help me bring freshwater business opportunity and technology transfer to third world countries. I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And so I created a remote monitoring business, used the software I already had, because software I know, but the hardware I don't know. And these machines required hardware. And it was really cool. We were the first ones that came up with smart cards, because in Nigeria, for example, they didn't want to use cash, or, things would get dirty, having a cat coin thing on the machine. Anyway, all of these things that we did that were really forward thinking. But I had a person that was so fearful of being blamed that could not find his mistakes, because he would get blocked. If you'd say, could you look at this? He would be so disabled from fear of blame.
Yeah.
I'm being blamed because I did something wrong, that he wouldn't go fix the mistake. And he also decided that, and not from being an icky person, but just, I guess, not being respected in the way that I respect a person, and misconstrued that. Anyway, you can have great businesses, and if you don't, as you said, if you don't get the right people around you, whether it's people you hire, people you bring in as suppliers, vendors, alliance partners, partners, just know that actually it's a statistic. I mean, most entrepreneurial ventures, the partners, they don't all last.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really a compelling conversation because this happens so often, right? As people, we want to be kind to those around us, our friends, relatives, as you said, business colleagues, preferred vendors, and we go off on this new venture. We're so passionate about, our business idea and what we're going to do. And we're oftentimes blinded to make better decisions based on our relationships because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, or we feel like, oh, they're just so great. They would be wonderful here. But without doing the proper research and understanding of what they bring to the table, oftentimes it fails. And I appreciate you telling your story too, because we've lived that. And I think we really want to help people not make those mistakes, right?
Yes. I had even came down for me to take a look at my mission statement, because my mission statement had the terms, had something like create and inspire principal excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who did I think I was? I am not a therapist. So I felt, this was something I had to learn. I felt that I could, one, I was such a high achiever, I could do it in spite of them.
Mm.
And two, that because I modeled such a high ground way, that, the person who didn't align with that immediately would just all of a sudden get some aha and choose to change. And that is not necessarily the case. So now my mission statement says something about being a bright light. So I will shine a light in front of people, so that they can see the way, but it is not my role I can change the context. I can't change a person.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So how do we keep people out of these pitfalls? How do we teach them to be tough and make decisions for themselves based on their business plans and mission statements?
Yes. Now let's see if I could segue this back to the second book of mine, which is Pivot to Clarity, which is what you asked about, because I don't want to ignore your question. So clarity is hugely important in what you've just asked. And there are two parts of clarity. One is getting clear for you. If you are not clear for you, how on earth can you be clear about what you really want to see or inspire others? And so for me, for example, in my story, one of the things that I needed to get clear about was how I was going to have the bravery to set boundaries up front.
Mm-hmm.
And was the leader's role to set the direction. So we get into the detail. I work mostly with organs where they go. So that getting clear part is huge. And you cannot, and as an entrepreneur, we want to be inspiring. We want to inspire VCs to give us money. We want to inspire our employees to step up and just get stuff done. And we cannot be inspiring unless we're first inspired. So we have to get clear.
So when we talk about pivot, right, oftentimes people look at that as just a major component of the business. And I don't want to say it's dramatic, but at the same time, it's like, wow, I've got to pivot now. How do we walk through that? What are the steps to understand what a pivot looks like and how important of a role it can play?
So as an entrepreneur, if you're a solo entrepreneur, sometimes the pivot that all of the media and startup books talk about can possibly happen. But really, that's even though I still think it takes longer, the decision to pivot is quick. The awareness that you need to pivot is not necessarily quick. And the actual process of orchestrating that pivot is not quick. So don't give up too soon.
Yeah, and by the way, people sometimes will give up too soon. They're almost at their mark, but they get frustrated and lack the confidence to follow through on the plan. And I think that's what's great about books or guidance on making pivots is it talks about giving you the strength and the longevity to stick it out and make that decision and see through with it.
Absolutely. My first book, The Pivot: Orchestrating Extraordinary Business Momentum, does have sections specifically for startups. And for me, a pivot is, just think of the words from and to. I'm going from one place to another place. And there's stories at the beginning, at the end, like the last 20% is prescriptive. So as you go through your journey, you can check back and say, where am I now? And what are some possible next steps? What might I do differently? What could my step do? I'm here, but I want to be here. What might I do next?
Yeah. Let me ask a question for our listeners, our entrepreneurs. Below your subtitles, get clear for you, be clear for others.
Yes.
What tools do you give people to find that clarity? And as an example, I base my goals and decisions on my values, right? So I've mapped out what my personal values are for me and my family, and then I make my business decisions, because I own the business, around those values. How do people find that clarity so that they know what direction they should be going?
Now, I recently, and this is not in the book, however, I recently posted, I think I posted it on YouTube, a video because I think it's really important for this part. And that is pausing. Pausing is so important. And when you're getting clear, pausing, the first step to that is to allow yourself to be in awe. And entrepreneurs have an easier time with this than those that have been in business for a while, because they talk themselves out of it, or they're just not used to it. They're just used to being incremental. But give yourself the time. And I don't mean carve out 10 minutes between meetings. I mean, get away, go somewhere else, take an hour, even if it's just an hour walk. If you can, though, carve out half a day, something that allows you to truly pause and get into that state where, and I say awe versus curiosity, because you're not trying to figure it out. You're just thinking of what would be phenomenal. What would be absolutely just that huge, as you say, yes, for me and for this business. And then the next step. So there are 3 steps in the pause for getting clear. The next step is interruption. So when you're in awe, what's going to happen is you're going to get monkey mind happening, and you're going to get all these thoughts go through your head. And I want you to learn to just interrupt it. And don't say, F that. Right? Just say, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Or say the first and then switch to the second, whatever. Let your mind know that it's okay that those thoughts come through, because we're human and they're going to come through. And just learn to interrupt yourself. You're saying to yourself, well, I can't share that with anybody. They'll think I'm crazy. Or how can I possibly get the capital for that? Or, whatever it is. And just in this particular state, just let it go. Isn't that interesting? And let it go. And then the next step in that is to recover. And you take a lot of adventures, and I'm sure you're familiar with recovery.
Yeah.
And even recovery while you're in the adventure, that you have to somehow refuel your body to then keep going. We all need that, whether it's something has really caused our emotions to rise, and we need to just step away for a second, or before we send that email out, we want to sleep on it.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's that you've been in awe. You've said, isn't that interesting, to the interruptions? And then you allow yourself to sleep with that state of awe in your mind. And some magic could happen for you.
You know, I don't think people give enough credit to stepping back and looking at the big picture. You know, I talked about my values. One of my key values is family, right? It's, you know, God first, then family. And oftentimes I have to sit back, even if it's in my office, and look out at what my wife and I have put together for our family as it relates to our home and you know, what the kids get to do and all those other things. Because if we forget about some of those things, we forget about why we're doing it. And the same thing goes for business. You know, if you're in the middle of a project, it's great to step back and go, okay, wow, this is where I'm at. And the other thing I like that you said, you know, is not having to figure it out. You can be in awe, but you don't have to figure it out. You know, I heard Grant Cardone on one of his posts. He says, you know, he gets up in the morning and he writes his big lofty goal down. And, you know, maybe it's, I want to make $10 million in the next 60 days. He doesn't allow his mind to try to figure it out because he knows by saying it, his mind will get to the point of figuring it out. But by throwing those big goals out there and allowing yourself to resonate on them. And I just love that notion of we don't have to figure out right then at that moment. Let's allow our brains to work on it and subtly get to the project.
Absolutely. Yes. The interruption part, what happens, and this is something I talk about the book, it's chapter 7. Actually, this is the chapter I give away. I think it's so important to know about ourselves and to know about others, is hope and fear. And the chapter doesn't talk a lot about hope other than just hope is an opener. So if you are the type of entrepreneur that stays in awe and opens up the doors and you know, sheds hope, that's not going to be enough. You need to understand fear. And I mentioned one in my early story about the fear of being blamed. You know, people will have that. So the words you choose, and this is getting a little bit into the being clear with others so that they can get clear part. When fear is present, it is going to block, it's going to keep your message from landing with the intention that you meant it to land. And so there are a few common fears. One is the fear of looking bad. And most of us that are achievers have that in some way. And hopefully those who have become more aware of ourselves are aware of it, and we stop ourselves and we say, get over yourself. You know, be brave. It's okay if you look bad, you look stupid. One is being blamed. Another is the fear of failure. That's a huge one from entrepreneurs. You know, that disappointment when something doesn't work out. You know, how can you pivot that? You know, pivot is not just a pivot in strategy. You can pivot yourself too, your own emotions and how you feel about things. And you can learn to change your emotions pretty quickly. Not right away from being sad to being, you know, ridiculously happy, but in phases. And over time, you learn to do it so quick that people think you're always ridiculously happy because you're just so good at it. Fear of loss, which is different than fear of failure, and fear of confrontation, which, you know, again, you know, when you're in awe, you're excited about something, you've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and then you express it to others, you know, just know that they've got all this stuff going on in their heads, no matter what level of in position in business they are. And so be patient with the communication. You may have to communicate it a different way. You may need to learn something about them so that you use some words in front of it. I think the biggest thing that one can do to help push fear aside is to get to the point. You know, yeah. It's not a poem. It's not a story where we can start with story and just draw people in, get to the point, and then get to all that other stuff.
Yeah. Well, Lori, I really appreciate your time. You've got a beautiful book out, great learnings inside that book, as well as I've seen from your own social media lots of words of wisdom you're talking about and posting. I see you had interacted with my good friend David Meltzer recently, so I love
David
seeing
is
that.
awesome.
He's just an incredible soul. He was actually the catalyst for pushing me to do this show over 3 years ago. So David, if you're listening, thank you again. But I'm going to post up your website and where people can get this book. If you want to follow Lori on Instagram, it's Pivot Catalyst, PIVOT CATALYST. And I've already downloaded the free chapter. I'm looking forward to reading that and learning more about your book itself from the inside, Pivot to Clarity. So Lori, thank you so much. Any last words for our listeners?
Well, let's just wrap it up with the term that we both love, which is yes. Let yourself get to that yes. If it's not yes, it's a no. So get yourself to yes, and then do your best to communicate with others so that they can get that clarity of yes.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, you don't always have to say yes, and sometimes that's the hard part. You've got to pivot to a no and follow the real yes. So, hey, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to the book and learning more about Pivot to Clarity.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answer is Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen, and thank you, and have a great week.